There is something uniquely human in the way people from small communities process fear. In Cipul Parteaui from Las Fierbinți, that process unfolds in the most intimate, absurd, and touching way possible. The episode takes what could have been a simple comedic misunderstanding and turns it into a psychological study of how collective paranoia is born, how it spreads, and how it takes root in places where imagination often fills the void left by knowledge. On the surface, it is a funny episode, full of witty dialogue and familiar absurdities. But beneath the laughter lies a slow unraveling of human emotion, a portrait of vulnerability disguised as humor. The small village of Fierbinți has always been a space of contradictions. It exists halfway between reality and fantasy, a place where modernity knocks on the door but never quite enters, and where people's dreams are both bigger and smaller than life. In this fragile balance, the idea of the chip becomes the perfect catalyst. When rumors spread that a chip is being implanted into people to control them, the villagers respond not with reason, but with instinct. That instinct, deeply rooted in centuries of mistrust and fear, reveals how psychological defense mechanisms operate in collective form. Each villager reacts in a way that reflects their inner conflicts. Bobiță, with his eternal smirk and cynical optimism, uses humor as protection. He refuses to show fear, but his exaggerated calmness betrays anxiety. He jokes about selling anti-chip drinks, but beneath the surface, he too wonders what is real. His bar, always the center of social exchange, turns into an echo chamber of paranoia. Conversations bounce off the walls, picking up distortion with every retelling. What begins as rumor transforms into narrative truth. The episode captures this transformation beautifully, without ever resorting to melodrama. The dialogue flows naturally, as if the camera simply stumbled upon a group of people talking nonsense, but that nonsense is deeply revealing. Celentano, often dismissed as the village drunk, becomes the emotional barometer of the story. His rambling about mind control and invisible signals is at once ridiculous and poetic. Through his words, the audience sees how loneliness and helplessness shape perception. Alcohol blurs his logic, but it also frees his subconscious. When he says that they might be watching, what he truly means is that he feels unseen. His fear of being controlled is really a fear of insignificance. The brilliance of the episode lies in how it exposes that fear without judging it. It recognizes that paranoia in small doses is a way of reclaiming meaning. When the world feels chaotic, the idea that someone, somewhere, is in control can be oddly comforting. The villagers' reactions mirror a larger social truth, the need to believe in something even if that something is terrifying. The chip, as rumor, becomes a metaphor for the invisible systems that already shape their lives. Politics, economy, technology, urban culture, all forces that exist beyond their comprehension yet affect them deeply. Watching them debate, argue, and joke about it feels like watching humanity itself try to make sense of modernity. The beauty of Las Fierbinți is that it never patronizes its characters. It allows them to be ignorant without being stupid, fearful without being irrational. In Cipul Parteaui, ignorance is not an insult. It is a symptom of disconnection. The villagers live in a world where information reaches them without context, where knowledge becomes fragmented, where rumor replaces education. The writers capture this reality with astonishing precision. The dialogue moves like a circle, repeating the same themes, exaggerating details, turning speculation into memory. It feels like the oral storytelling traditions of old villages, where a story told 3 times becomes truth. What makes this psychologically profound is that the audience recognizes this mechanism in their own lives. How many of us believe things we've heard too many times? The difference is that the villagers of Fierbinți still express that process with laughter, while modern society often hides it behind seriousness. The cinematography in this episode adds layers to the psychology of fear. The camera lingers on faces, capturing small gestures, nervous laughter, suspicious glances, sudden silences. There is a moment when Gianni stares into the distance, pretending to understand how technology works, explaining with misplaced confidence how chips control people. It's a moment of pure psychological irony. His words are nonsense, but his tone is convincing because it reflects a universal need, the need to appear informed. Gianni's ignorance becomes a defense against humiliation. His bravado hides fragility. This is what makes the characters of Las Fierbinți so endearing. They are flawed but authentic, driven by emotions that transcend culture. Every village in the world has a Gianni, someone who masks insecurity with enthusiasm. Every society has a Bobiță, the opportunist who transforms anxiety into profit. And every group has a Celentano, the philosopher of chaos, whose confusion sometimes sounds like wisdom. What Cipul Partea Y achieves is a perfect balance between these archetypes, allowing each to express a different psychological reaction to the same fear. Bobiță externalizes it. Celentano internalizes it. Gianni rationalizes it, and the others oscillate between them. The collective dynamic becomes a microcosm of how societies handle crises. Fear becomes contagious, not because it is real, but because it gives people something to share. In this sense, the episode is not just comedy but sociology. It studies how laughter acts as a social adhesive. Even as they panic, the villagers never stop laughing. That laughter is not happiness, it's therapy. It prevents the fear from becoming unbearable. There is a fine line between comedy and tragedy, and Las Fierbinți walks it with elegance. The writing never loses empathy, even when mocking absurdity. Every joke carries a hint of compassion. It's as if the writers are saying, we are all like them, just in different ways. I find this deeply moving because it reminds me of my own family's conversations in small towns, where gossip often substituted for news and humor softened the edges of ignorance. The villagers' obsession with the chip mirrors, our modern obsession with invisible threats, viruses, algorithms, conspiracies. The more we try to understand them, the less we seem to know. In this sense, the episode becomes timeless. It is not just about Romania. It's about humanity in the age of uncertainty. The sound design also plays an important psychological role. The faint hum of electronics, the radio murmuring in the background, the echoes of distant laughter, all contribute to an atmosphere of unease. It feels like the village itself is alive, whispering to its inhabitants. The bar, once a place of comfort, becomes a stage of confusion. Each conversation builds upon the last, until reality itself becomes blurry. The genius of the directing lies in restraint. There are no dramatic camera movements or emotional outbursts. Everything unfolds naturally, like an everyday situation slowly turning surreal. The viewer feels both amused and unsettled, laughing at the absurdity while recognizing the truth in it. That duality is the essence of Las Fierbinți. It is not satire in the classical sense. It is empathy, disguised as comedy. Psychologically, Cipul Partea Y also explores the concept of suggestion. When one person introduces an idea, no matter how ridiculous, it takes root through repetition and emotional resonance. Once fear is attached to it, it becomes almost impossible to dislodge. This is exactly what happens in the episode. The chip ceases to be a rumor. It becomes part of the villagers' emotional reality. Their actions are driven not by logic, but by the need to regain control. They discuss, They invent, they laugh, and in doing so, they reclaim ownership of their fear. The episode shows that even irrational beliefs can have rational emotional origins. People fear not because they are foolish, but because they have been powerless for too long. This insight transforms what could have been a simple joke into a profound commentary on human psychology. Another fascinating element is the generational divide. The younger characters are curious, less frightened, but equally confused. They speak of technology as if it were magic, while the older ones treat it as witchcraft. This tension reflects the gap between exposure and understanding. The youth imitate modernity without grasping it. The elders reject it without trying. In that tension lies the tragedy of transition. Society evolves faster than people's capacity to adapt. Fierbinți, like many rural places, becomes a museum of half-understood progress. The psychological weight of that progress is enormous. It manifests not in overt rebellion, but in quiet skepticism. The villagers make jokes to hide their discomfort, yet every joke reveals their need for meaning. The laughter in this episode often feels like crying in disguise. What makes Cipul Partea 1 so emotionally rich is its ability to present ignorance as something deeply human, not shameful. When Celentano misinterprets a scientific concept, we do not laugh at him. We laugh with him because we recognize the absurdity of trying to understand a world that constantly outpaces us. The humor becomes compassion, a shared acknowledgement of our limitations. From a storytelling perspective, the episode is almost musical. It builds rhythm through dialogue repetition, like a chorus of confusion. The scenes move with a kind of hypnotic flow, each conversation echoing the last, each misunderstanding reinforcing the previous one. By the time the credits roll, nothing has changed externally, yet everything feels different. The villagers have not learned the truth, but they have learned to live with their version of it. That psychological adaptation is what gives the episode its emotional depth. It shows that sometimes the only way to survive confusion is to laugh at it. On a personal note, watching this episode reminded me how thin the line is between skepticism and cynicism. In my own life, I've seen how people use humor to hide anxiety about things they cannot control. Whether it's politics, health, or technology, laughter becomes a shield. Cipul Partea 1 captures that perfectly. The villagers may seem ridiculous, but they are emotionally intelligent in their own way. They understand that fear shared is fear halved. The collective ritual of talking, speculating, and joking becomes a form of community therapy. The episode's final moments leave a lingering sense of melancholy. The laughter fades, replaced by silence and uncertainty. Yet that silence feels peaceful, almost comforting. It suggests that even without answers, people can find balance in togetherness. They may not trust the world, but they trust each other enough to keep laughing. That, perhaps, is the secret wisdom of Fierbinți. It teaches that logic may divide, but laughter unites. From a psychological standpoint, that is an act of resilience. The episode's brilliance lies in how it transforms paranoia into poetry. It takes a rumor about chips and turns it into a meditation on trust, identity, and fear. It shows that ignorance is not the opposite of intelligence, but the shadow of it, always present, always shaping perception. The character's absurdity is our own reflection, magnified by the lens of comedy. Cipul Partea 1 is not merely an episode about villagers. It is an essay about humanity, disguised as a sitcom. It invites us to laugh, but also to listen, to see how humor reveals what fear conceals. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths come from the simplest voices, the ones brave enough to laugh at their own confusion. Watching it feels like looking into the collective subconscious of a society that has seen too much change and too little understanding. In the end, that is the beauty of Las Fierbinți. It tells the truth through laughter, turning fear into connection and confusion into art.